I'd like to take a moment and address the Lieutenant Dan situation. I've thought a lot about doing a video talking about this person. I feel like me especially has a really good perspective, to offer in regards to everything going on with this Lieutenant Dan. And that is because on AfterPrisonShow, I've been down this road a lot. In the past, trying to help a lot of different people, working with them individually, doing GoFundMes, seeing those situations play out and in a lot of cases go wrong. So I truly feel like I have a great perspective to offer on the Lieutenant Dan situation. So for those of you who may not know who this Lieutenant Dan is, that's impossible if you are on social media. But just in case you don't know, this is a homeless dude who lives on a boat down in Tampa Bay, Florida. Some desolate freaking boat sitting at some free seawall where he's been asked to leave, but he hasn't left, and he's ridden out 2 hurricanes in this 26-foot sailboat or whatever the hell it is. Where I live at, we've got a lot of these homeless encampments on sailboats. And yeah, that's basically what the Lieutenant Dan situation is. This guy is missing a foot. That's why I guess he's been nicknamed Lieutenant Dan, plus living on the sailboat. But then there was this guy named Tampa Terrence, I believe is his name, who met this guy by happenstance and began talking with him, and then, filmed a video or 2 with him, getting to know him. And those videos quickly blew up on the internet. Not to mention the police encounters with the police trying to get this guy to leave in this sailboat or get off the sailboat. And he rides out Hurricane Helene and Milton. Milton especially, which hit Tampa Bay. He rides out 2 hurricanes in the sailboat. Anyways, this guy becomes quickly pretty popular on TikTok. And that ends up being intensified by the fact that a very popular streamer, Aiden Ross, gets involved in the situation temporarily. I don't even know how that all played out. Aiden Ross comes to the rescue, comes to the rescue, not even so to speak. He really does. He offers Lieutenant Dan $100,000 sign-on bonus and $50,000 a month to stream exclusively on his streaming platform, or the streaming platform that he's a big part of, Kick. And all he has to do is stream for 100 hours a month, I believe, to make $50,000 a month. Could you imagine? When Aiden Ross got involved in this guy's situation, that's when the entire world started really clout chasing off of this dude. And, I hate to admit it, but that's what I'm doing here. But this one hits a little different for me, especially because I have been down this road and I see so clearly so much in relation to this. Again, me working with people who have been in very similar situations to this guy, Lieutenant Dan. I know this story very well. When Aiden Ross gets involved in the situation, a lot of people start paying attention to this. But then something happens with the Aiden Ross offer, and I think that begins with the fact that Aiden Ross sees Lieutenant Dan's criminal history, and it is extensive. There's 20 mugshots of this dude, possibly 20 different arrests. I don't know if he's ever been to prison or not. But he does have some very interesting charges. Now, somewhere between the time that Aiden Ross sees this guy's charges and mugshots, the entire internet runs with the idea that Lieutenant Dan is a PDF and that Aiden Ross has pulled his deal from Lieutenant Dan. That information would get back to Lieutenant Dan, who would then comment in response to that, saying that he didn't care anything about what Aiden Ross was offering and that he never asked Aiden Ross for anything. And he was very direct with what he was saying in relation to that. Aiden Ross would then respond saying, hey, I never even said anything about pulling the deal. He would actually do a little video with Lieutenant Dan saying that's crazy that you reacted to this and that you let the internet get to you. So at that point, I don't know if the Aiden Ross deal fell apart. Aiden Ross was still saying something along the lines of the offer still stood. I don't particularly know. Regardless, that is when everybody started getting in on the Lieutenant Dan action. Talking about his criminal history that involves something like an assault on a woman, an assault on a law enforcement officer, something in relation to potentially like trying to set a woman on fire. I don't necessarily know. I don't really care, and I should, and maybe I will do a follow-up reacting to Lieutenant Dan's criminal history, but that's not what I'm focusing on right now. I'm focusing on what instant internet fame can do to a person that could have, that has never experienced anything like that, and also who is in such a vulnerable situation and placement in life as this guy, Lieutenant Dan, is. Again, essentially homeless aside from a sailboat. And as far as I can tell from a video that I think was created by his daughter, is somewhat of a recovering or, some sort of a drug addict. That's the point that I want to focus on with all of this. The guy Tampa Terrence, who first introduced Lieutenant Dan, had put together a GoFundMe for this guy. I think the GoFundMe goal was like $2,500. Tampa Terrence says that he had put this GoFundMe together at $2,500, hoping to raise those funds to buy Lieutenant Dan a sailboat, a new boat, which in my mind just sounds like absolute bullshit to me. You put the GoFundMe together, and again, this is just my opinion. You put the GoFundMe together at a low price, knowing or hoping that thing was going to get blown out of the water, far exceeding the goal of $2,500. It would. It ended up raising something like $40,000. But then there started to become some friction between Tampa Terrence and Lieutenant Dan, because other people started to get involved in this situation and really started, putting the bug in the ear of Lieutenant Dan, that you don't need to be rocking with Tampa Terrence and you should be rocking with me instead. And one of those individuals, I believe, is a guy by the name of Check the Star. I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know how popular he is. He must be popular. I don't know anything. So I'm not going to sit here and badmouth him. I've got no reason to. But there's a lot of people who've been making comments saying that this guy Check the Star is no good for Lieutenant Dan. Did Check the Star come into this situation and strong arm the clout? The absolute guaranteed views away from Tampa Terrence. Is that what happened? I don't personally know. I know that Lieutenant Dan would become, a little hostile toward the Terrence individual because of the GoFundMe and the fact that, they weren't able to pull the funds out because Lieutenant Dan doesn't have an ID and the GoFundMe was set up under somebody else's name, even though it was intended for Lieutenant Dan. GoFundMe don't play that shit. I've been down this road. I did 2 GoFundMes with an individual named Danny who served 40 years in prison. And that is exactly what this situation reminds me of, is Danny on my YouTube channel, AfterPrisonShow. I've heard that this guy, Tampa Terrence, has even paid Lieutenant Dan like $7,000 of these funds that they haven't even been able to get access to yet, which is crazy to think if Tampa Terrence is coming out of his own pocket, forking over $7,000 just as a show of good faith. What if they never get this GoFundMe money? That's a interesting thing to think about with all of this. But there's also been speculation that this guy, Lieutenant Dan, is now getting high again, and potentially that coming from the company he is now keeping. This is like Danny 4.0 right here. This is 4 times as crazy as the Danny situation was in my own personal experience. It's like running across somebody who or believe would be so great on video, all it would take is for the world to get the opportunity to be introduced to this person and feeling like that person is going to catapult in popularity, views, content, and their success could help your success. That's what this is like. It was kind of that way when I met Danny, except, of course, all I wanted to do was help this guy. I had no idea how good he would be on video. He was great on video. The world fell in love with him. I literally had Hollywood reaching out to me, wanting to make a freaking movie about this man's life. I wonder if that's taking place in the Lieutenant Dan situation yet. It probably is. I've seen my local news outlets here in the state of Virginia picking up the Lieutenant Dan story. Everybody's got their hand in this clout cookie jar. Lieutenant Dan becomes an overnight sensation, basically. You've got popular people making content with this guy, and, the most popular people like Aiden Ross wanting to get in on this action. What do you think that does for a guy like Lieutenant Dan who ain't got a pot to piss in? Well, probably only a pot to piss in, living on that little sailboat that he's been on. The prima donna shit is at an all-time high with this dude. Like, I see it, and it's you can't knock that. Because, again, you're taking a guy who ain't never had shit, probably ain't never had shit. I don't know the guy's backstory. But he's a guy that definitely don't got nothing right now. And you're giving him the world on a golden spoon. It just really, in my opinion, gosh almighty, man. It's like people could fuck up a wet dream. It's a saying. You think about people who want to help people, who try to help people, and then how that line gets muddied when you add content to it. Oh, you're giving a homeless guy $20 on camera. You're doing it for the views. There's a guy on TikTok that I follow right now who gives homeless people haircuts. And granted, the whole world is like, yo, this is amazing what you're doing. You're giving these people a full makeover right there in the street, and it's a beautiful thing. But you're doing it for the views. Granted, you probably have every pure intention in the world, but you're doing it for the views, and you need the views to continue to do what you're doing. That line gets muddied and murkied no matter where you're coming from, whether your intentions are sincere or your intentions are, you know what? I'm going to act like I want to help people, and you know what? I might even help people. But I know damn well this shit going to get some views. You look at it now, people see a cash cow like Lieutenant Dan, and everybody's chomping at the bit, trying to get a little bit of them views. I wonder how many people are traveling from out of state to come get in on this action. And that's crazy to think about. And you know that there's people who are doing it. It's sad because this is a vulnerable dude. He really is a vulnerable guy, especially if he is a recovering or, a temporary absent drug user. And now with the speculation of the fact that he probably is getting high again, if this guy falls right back into addiction and like deep relapse, and how bad that could potentially end up, think about this. And that's where I'm going to leave this at. And this was actually a reason why I stopped helping people. And this is deep right here. No matter who I tried to help, and a lot of them were recovering drug addicts, it usually always ended poorly. Whether that person fell back into addiction, heavy addiction, or whether that person ended up getting locked back up again, or whether that person ended up having some sort of ill view of me, like somehow I screwed everything up. I stopped helping people and working with them because, again, in most all situations, no matter how much I tried to do, no matter how much we did with my personal platforms, it mostly always ended badly and left me questioning myself, feeling like, did my attempt to help a person actually cause them more harm than good? And I wrestled that a lot. Some people can't be helped. And sometimes you're going to run across people who are in the best place that they're going to be in. I heard a saying recently, and man, that shit has stuck with me, man. And it actually was on The Walking Dead, Fear the Dead. I can't remember who said it, but somebody on that show said, people never change. They just run around in circles. And man, that was such a powerful statement right there. Now, I don't agree with it fully because I feel like it really should be most people, or at least some people, never change. And most people or some people just run around in circles. You know, sometimes some people aren't never going to end up any better than where you run into them at. And that's just a fact of life and the way of the world. You know, maybe where Tampa Terrence ran into Lieutenant Dan at might have potentially been the best place he's ever going to be. And all of this, all of these handouts and all of these people and all of this clout and views and overnight internet fame will end up being more detrimental than good. And God, I pray that I'm wrong as hell about this. I pray that I'm so wrong about this. But like I said, I've seen this story play out many times in my own personal endeavors. I hope that this guy, Lieutenant Dan, ends up being a success that is able to carry on. I hope he ends up becoming like the next Hawk Tua sensation, except obviously in a totally different regard. You know, that was a person that found this 15 minutes of fame and has been able to run with that for a little bit of longevity, at least a couple of months so far, even though you really don't hear too much about her anymore right this second. Maybe that's over with. I don't know. The big difference between the Hawk Tua and Lieutenant Dan is Lieutenant Dan probably has a pretty substantial drug problem that he is in some form or fashion somewhere in that circle of. Maybe again, when Tampa Terrence ran into him, he was in the, not getting high and sober for a bit part of that circle. But all of a sudden, here comes all of this fame, attention, new stresses, new pressures. People may be getting high around him. And the biggest kicker, money. Where is he going to go? Like I said, it's probably not going to end good. And sadly, he's probably going to be left in a worser situation, a far more worse situation than when he was found. Because once them views are gone and those 15 minutes of fame are gone, I mean, look at it. Hawk Tua, Daniel Larson, World of T-shirts, Lieutenant Dan. Even though maybe they don't all share a lot of common similarities, there's one that I feel like is that they do share, and that is instant overnight thrown into the limelight internet fame. How long will that last for, and what will happen when all of that's gone? And sadly for the Lieutenant Dan situation, and maybe even like World of T-shirts, those two especially, will their downfall come before the internet fame runs out? I truly hope not, but I wish nothing but success for the guy, Lieutenant Dan. I don't personally know him. It's not my fight. It's not my cause. I just wanted to share my 2 cents on it, being someone who has worked with and tried to help countless people in the past and seeing that situation go wrong. I wish these folks who are working with this guy far more success than I personally had. And more importantly, I just wish that success for the guy, Lieutenant Dan, to be able to get to a much better place than he was found in. And that's all I got. Thanks for allowing me to share.